Emily Grace had always been the glue that held her family together. Mornings started with the smell of coffee brewing as she packed Ryan's lunch and coaxed her oldest into eating breakfast. Evenings ended with bedtime stories, her voice weaving tales of faraway kingdoms until her children drifted off to sleep. Between those moments were diaper changes, scraped knees kissed better, and meals that brought the family together, no matter how chaotic the day had been. Her husband Ryan often remarked that her determination to build a fulfilling life for their family was as impressive as it was inspiring. The peace of their typical day shattered one evening when Ryan arrived home from work, expecting to be greeted by the familiar chaos of family life. Instead, the house was eerily silent. The children, who usually ran to him with giggles and stories of their day, were nowhere to be seen at first glance. His heart pounded as he called out for Emily, his voice echoing off the walls. When he found the children huddled together in fear, their tear-streaked faces deepened his dread. Emily's phone and purse sat untouched on the counter, but her vehicle was gone. He tried to convince himself she might have stepped out briefly, but Emily would never leave the children unattended. As the realization sank in, he grabbed his phone and called the police, his voice trembling as he explained the situation. Earlier that day, sunlight poured through the windows of their modest suburban home as Emily folded laundry, keeping an eye on her toddler's antics. She didn't notice the old rusted truck idling down the street, or the way its driver, Colton Reeves, watched her house with a predator's gaze. A man had been seen working in the neighborhood recently, blending into the quiet rhythm of suburban life. His demeanor was unassuming, and he moved like just another contractor, completing odd jobs without drawing attention. Unbeknownst to anyone, Colton Reeves had spent weeks meticulously observing Emily's routines, noting her habits and the times her home was most vulnerable. The police initially turned their focus to Ryan. The unusual circumstances of Emily's disappearance, no signs of forced entry and her vehicle missing, raised questions about their relationship. His initial shock and fear did little to allay suspicions, as investigators noted the lack of any immediate evidence pointing to an external threat. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices from their home a few days earlier, which added to the scrutiny. Investigators wondered if a domestic argument might have escalated, though Ryan vehemently denied any conflict that could lead to Emily leaving or being harmed. Frustrated and fearful, Ryan pleaded with investigators, recounting every detail of their lives. His voice broke as he emphasized Emily's devotion to their children. "She wouldn't even go to the store without making sure they're okay," he insisted. "Emily would never leave the kids. She wouldn't abandon them." Initially, the police kept Ryan at a distance, their skepticism evident in their probing questions and guarded interactions. However, mounting evidence, including Colton's truck appearing on surveillance footage and the discovery of Emily's abandoned car, began to exonerate Ryan. As their suspicions waned, Ryan's unwavering determination to find Emily began to shift their perspective. When investigators began reviewing surveillance footage, Ryan stepped in to help, offering his intimate knowledge of the neighborhood. He pointed out potential hiding spots or unusual activity that might otherwise go unnoticed. Determined to aid the search, Ryan rallied neighbors who organized small search parties to comb nearby woods and parks under police guidance. Meanwhile, Ryan focused his efforts on keeping the children calm and maintaining communication with the police. His visible anguish and relentless efforts eventually aligned with mounting evidence when Emily's abandoned car was discovered in a remote area. The location, coupled with surveillance footage of a suspicious truck near the site, redirected the investigation toward uncovering the sinister connection to her abduction. On the first day of her ordeal, Emily stepped outside to retrieve a package from the porch. The sunshine and quiet betrayed no hint of danger. She had barely closed the door behind her when Colton struck. His hand clamped over her mouth with terrifying force as he shoved her into her vehicle. Her struggles were futile against his strength as he bound her hands and feet with duct tape, keeping a wary eye on her as he drove. His overconfidence, however, led him to underestimate Emily's ability to leave clues undetected. Colton's plan was meticulous. He parked his truck in a nearby vacant lot to avoid suspicion. After driving Emily's car several miles away, he transferred her to his truck, where he could exert greater control. From there, he drove her to an isolated cabin deep in the woods, a location he had scouted weeks earlier. The air inside the cabin was musty, filled with the scent of mildew and rotting wood. Emily's instincts screamed for her to fight, but her thoughts clung to her children. Tears welled as she pictured their faces. Steeling herself, she channeled her fear into a fierce resolve. That first evening, Colton maintained a cold, watchful silence. His movements were calculated, each glance in Emily's direction an unsettling reminder of his control. Emily noted his nervous habits, the subtle tapping of his fingers against the chair, the way his jaw tightened when he paused. Though his demeanor was outwardly confident, cracks in his facade betrayed a hint of unease. Emily, meanwhile, kept her own actions measured. She avoided direct confrontation, choosing instead to observe her captor carefully. Each movement she made, shifting slightly in her chair, brushing her fingers against surfaces, was deliberate. She left traces of herself wherever she could. Strands of hair on the chair, fingerprints on the table. Her mind worked tirelessly, cataloging every detail of the cabin and Colton's behavior. As the hours dragged on, tension filled the room. Colton occasionally muttered to himself, his voice low and barely audible. Emily strained to catch his words, hoping for some insight into his plans. Despite the oppressive atmosphere, she refused to let despair take hold. Her resolve hardened with each passing minute. She would survive this. The following morning, as sunlight filtered through the trees, Colton's paranoia surfaced. While pacing near the window, he spotted an unmarked car slowly passing by the dirt road leading to the cabin. Though the vehicle continued on, Colton's unease grew palpable. His pacing turned frantic and his sharp muttering became more frequent. "Too close," he whispered, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "They're looking for her." Emily watched him carefully, her mind racing as she considered the possibilities. Colton's agitation might work to her advantage if it caused him to make a mistake. By midday, Colton had made his decision. "We can't stay here," he said abruptly, his voice laced with tension. He began gathering his belongings, tossing supplies into a bag while glancing nervously out the window. "They'll find us if we stay." Though fear gnawed at her, Emily concealed her relief. A change in location meant new opportunities to leave clues and increase her chances of escape. Colton's paranoia, while dangerous, might also be the crack in his meticulous plan she needed. Hours passed and Emily's situation grew more dire. On the second day, Colton stopped at another location deeper in the woods, dragging her from the truck. Earlier that morning, as Colton had briefly stepped away, Emily noticed a jagged piece of metal wedged beneath the passenger seat. With her hands still bound, she stretched her fingers as far as they could reach, brushing against the cold, sharp edge. She fought to pull it free, her heart pounding with the fear of being caught. After what felt like an eternity, the metal came loose, scraping her fingertips. Back in the truck, Emily concealed the shard in her palm and waited for the right moment. As they reached the forest, she began to saw through the duct tape binding her ankles, her movements painstakingly slow to avoid detection. Each pull of the jagged edge against the tape sent vibrations through her limbs. But she pressed on, fueled by thoughts of her children. Sweat dripped down her face, her breath shallow and controlled as the tape finally gave way. She tucked her legs beneath her, ready to act. As Colton pulled her toward the dense forest, Emily seized her chance. With a burst of strength, she stabbed the jagged piece of metal into his leg. Colton howled in pain, dropping his gun in the process. Without hesitation, Emily bolted into the woods, her hands still partially bound but her legs free. She stumbled upon a small cabin where a man, Tom Greer, stood on the porch. He was in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rugged face framed by salt and pepper hair. His eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked to Emily as she approached, taking in her disheveled appearance and the panic in her voice. "Help me!" she gasped, her words tumbling out between shallow breaths. Her clothes were torn, and her wrists were red and raw from the bindings. Tom's expression shifted from suspicion to resolve as he stepped forward, his movements fluid and strong for his age. "Get inside," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. He held the door open for her, his gaze darting to the tree line as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Once inside, he guided Emily to a chair and crouched beside her, his presence a reassuring anchor amidst the chaos. "Tell me what happened," Tom urged, his tone calm but firm. Emily struggled to form the words, her hands trembling as she recounted the last harrowing hours. As she spoke, Tom retrieved a first aid kit, his hands deft as he cleaned the raw skin on her wrists. "He's out there," she whispered. "He's dangerous." Tom nodded, his jaw tightening. "You're safe now," he assured her, standing and crossing the room to where a shotgun rested against the wall. "Not much gets past me out here." The cabin was sparse but orderly, with shelves lined with tools and a faint smell of cedar in the air. Emily's eyes landed on a photograph on the mantel. Tom with a woman and a young boy, their smiles frozen in time. The sight tugged at something in her, but her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of leaves crunching outside. Tom moved to the window, his movements swift and purposeful. Moments later, Colton stormed into view, his limp pronounced but his fury undiminished. Tom's eyes narrowed, and he took a step back, gripping the shotgun with both hands. "Enough games!" Colton spat, his voice trembling with barely concealed desperation. "Send her out now, and no one gets hurt." Tom's jaw clenched, his military training surging to the forefront of his mind. He assessed Colton's stance, the unsteady grip on his weapon, and the desperation in his eyes. "You've already lost," Tom called out, his voice firm and commanding. "You don't want to test me." Colton laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You don't understand. She's mine. None of this was supposed to happen." His voice cracked, revealing the turmoil within. "I had a plan. This wasn't how it was supposed to go." Tom stepped into the doorway, his shotgun held steady. "Plans fall apart. That's when real men decide who they are. Right now you're showing me a coward." Colton's face twisted with rage, his knuckles white around the grip of his weapon. "Coward? You think I'm a coward? You don't know what I've been through." Tom's eyes stayed locked on Colton's. "I know desperation when I see it. I've been there, fighting battles you can't imagine. But you're not fighting for anything real, are you? Just your own delusions." Colton faltered, his shoulders sagging slightly as doubt crept in. "She was supposed to understand, to see me. None of this was supposed to happen like this." Tom took a measured step forward, his voice softening but losing none of its intensity. "Let her go. Walk away now, and you'll live to face the consequences like a man. Push this any further, and I promise you won't leave these woods." Colton's breathing quickened, his gaze darting between Tom and the cabin. For a moment it seemed he might lower his weapon, but then his resolve snapped. With a guttural yell, he raised his gun. Tom reacted instantly, his military instincts kicking in. A precise shot rang out, striking Colton square in the chest. He stumbled backward, dropping his weapon as he crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath. Blood seeped through his shirt as he writhed in pain, clutching his chest. Unbeknownst to anyone, police had been searching the woods nearby, moving methodically through the dense undergrowth. The sharp crack of Tom's shotgun shattered the stillness, its echo reverberating through the forest. The sound acted as a beacon, drawing the officers' attention. They quickened their pace, voices low as they signaled to each other and adjusted their positions, closing in on the cabin with calculated precision. Moments later, the officers emerged from the tree line, their presence sudden and commanding. Weapons drawn and senses heightened, they swiftly secured the area. Spotting Colton on the ground, badly injured but still alive, they called for immediate medical assistance. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and stabilized him before rushing him to the nearest hospital under heavy police escort. Inside the cabin, Emily watched through the window, her breath catching in her throat as relief washed over her. Her hands trembled, but her heart began to steady. When Tom re-entered, his expression was calm, though his eyes betrayed the weight of what had just transpired. "You're safe now," he said simply. "It's over." On the morning of the third day, Emily's family was reunited, but the scars of her ordeal lingered. Her return brought relief and joy, yet Ryan could see the weight of what she had endured etched on her face. She held their children close, tears streaming silently as she whispered reassurances. For days, Emily struggled to feel safe even in her own home, the familiar walls now reminders of the life she had narrowly escaped. Ryan became her rock, staying by her side as she navigated waves of fear, guilt, and anger. Investigators uncovered Colton's deep-seated resentment toward Ryan and obsessive fixation on Emily, stemming from a perceived slight years earlier. During his chilling confessions, Colton revealed that Ryan had unknowingly humiliated him during a neighborhood meeting. This humiliation planted the seed of resentment, which grew unchecked. Colton became fixated on Emily after seeing her kindness toward Ryan at the same meeting, misinterpreting her actions as a personal slight. These revelations left Emily's family shaken, as they realized how a seemingly small interaction had spiraled into a nightmare. Emily channeled her pain into action. She refused to let the trauma define her, instead focusing on preventing others from suffering a similar fate. She launched the Silent Signals campaign, aimed at educating communities on recognizing subtle signs of distress and fostering vigilance. Her efforts started locally, with workshops for neighbors, schools, and community centers. She spoke candidly about her experience, using her story to empower others. Tom Greer, who had been reluctant to leave the isolation of his cabin since the incident, attended one of Emily's first workshops. Her speech moved him deeply, reigniting a sense of purpose that had long lain dormant. After the workshop, he approached her, his voice steady but his eyes filled with emotion. "You're stronger than most people I've met," he said. "What you're doing here, it matters." Emily smiled through tears. "What you did for me mattered, Tom. You saved my life." Inspired by her courage, Tom began volunteering with her campaign, using his survival skills and military background to teach self-defense classes. His no-nonsense approach and quiet determination made him a trusted figure in the community, and he found himself reconnecting with people in ways he hadn't imagined possible. The Silent Signals campaign grew, spreading across the state and eventually garnering national attention. Emily was invited to speak on talk shows and at conferences, her calm yet impassioned voice resonating with audiences. She worked with law enforcement to develop neighborhood safety programs, and her advocacy led to the implementation of new protocols for recognizing and responding to signs of abduction. At home, Emily and Ryan worked tirelessly to rebuild their family's sense of security. The children, though young, seemed to find solace in their parents' unwavering love. Ryan took on the role of protector and confidant, giving Emily the space to heal, while also reminding her she didn't have to do it alone. Their bond, forged through shared pain and resilience, grew stronger. Tom, too, found healing in his connection with Emily and her family. The photograph on his mantle, his wife and son lost years ago, remained a reminder of his past, but it no longer defined him. He had found a new family in Emily and her cause. Colton recovered from his injuries but faced justice for his actions. The evidence gathered by investigators, combined with Emily's testimony and Tom's decisive intervention, led to his conviction on charges of abduction, assault, and attempted murder. Though his sentencing brought closure, Emily found peace in turning her darkest moment into a source of light for others. Years later, as Emily stood before a packed auditorium to accept an award for her advocacy, she reflected on how far she had come. Her speech was simple but powerful. "Trauma doesn't define us," she said. "It tests us. And through that test, we discover who we are and what we're capable of. I'm here because of the people who fought for me, who refused to give up. Together, we're proving that even in the darkest times, hope is stronger." As the audience erupted into applause, Emily spotted Ryan and their children in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. Tom stood off to the side, his arms crossed and his signature stoic expression softening into a small, approving nod. For the first time in years, Emily felt truly free. Thanks for joining us on the Crossroad Chronicles. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time as we explore more tales of choices and consequences. Thanks for watching.